Hey, you are listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark.
And I'm
And I'm your
Andy.
co-host. Oh, whoa.
Oh.
We haven't introduced you yet.
Oh, man.
I'm
very
I'm your
excited.
co-host, Josh.
And we
and
have
as you
Andy.
can hear, yeah, we have Andy from the Love What I Love podcast. He joined us last year when Tommy Doyle told us that Evil was going to die tonight. Well, that is not the case because he's back talking about Halloween Ends once again.
Hey, thank you so much, guys. And as you see, I'm very excited to be here as I jumped the gun on my introduction.
I am curious to see how this is going to go. Because I feel like this film, from the reactions I've seen online, are people that extremely love it or extremely hate it. And I'm curious to see which end of that spectrum you guys sit on, because it feels like there's really no gray area for this movie.
I mean, Marilyn Manson said it best. I wasn't born with enough middle fingers for this movie. If you remember when we talked about Halloween Kills, my statement was it felt like part 2 of just a really long movie, and that it was going to depend on this movie whether or not ultimately it turned out good.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
Yeah. I shouldn't have said that.
That's really interesting what you said, Josh, about the divisiveness online, because I've actually purposely been in like a blackout since I've seen this movie, in terms of I didn't want to read any opinions, because I was just really it was a very different movie. I don't think I hated it the way you did, Mark. I got problems with it, but when we get into details, I kind of feel like it's the opposite movie of Halloween Kills, in both in the good ways and the bad ways. And it's like the stuff that I thought that movie lacked, I thought this one did better. But then the stuff that Halloween Kills did really well, I thought this was missing big time. So it's interesting. I'm in the middle, but we'll wait for we get into our details.
So like as I was watching this, because I ended up, I don't know about you guys, but I ended up watching like all 3 movies leading up to this one. So
Yeah,
I had like
I had watched him like last week, so I was fairly fresh on him.
I redid Kills. I've honestly seen 2018 so many times. I think I have it memorized. I love that movie, so I didn't really feel like I needed to dive back into that one. But I watched Kills right beforehand. Yeah,
I think with this one, I kept that what you kept saying in mind, Mark, about this one kind of being a really elongated story, and so like when I was watching Kills, like I kept that in mind, and then about like halfway through my recent viewing of Kills, like I just kind of like silenced that voice, and I was like, let's just watch this for like a standalone movie. And I had a finer appreciation for it. I think it's just the brutality of that movie and how hard it goes. And then you get Halloween Ends, which is a vastly different movie, and feels like it had like the most ample opportunity to canonize another Halloween movie, and as Mark said, shoved its middle finger at it. So yeah,
it's almost like, I mean, I've only ever walked out of one movie out of a theater, and if I hadn't had to do this, there's a possibility I might have done that with this one. But it's almost like somebody wrote a script after seeing the original, and somebody told them the story of Halloween and Halloween Kills like 4 years ago, and they tried to write the third movie off of memory, and it was disconnected. It didn't make sense. It just didn't fit. It's like it's a whole other movie outside of this storyline. They built Kills to a big final showdown, and there was like no payoff. They blew their load in Kills.
I read an article recently with David Gordon Green, and I think one of the things that like immediately lets you know that it's not the same movie is the fact that, and this sounds really dumb to say, but it sets up your expectations right out of the title sequence, is that this is not the traditional we are going to go with the signature Halloween fonts with white and orange. No, we're gonna go with black, blue, and like that to me kind of like said, all right, like I'm curious like where this blue comes into place, and I'm gonna place this right now as the spoiler warning because I bought visual aids and the reason that I am not necessarily a fan of this movie after one initial viewing is because I was like the storyline. Where have I seen this before?
Oh yeah.
For those of you guys that are like, I paused because I showed my Blu-ray copy of Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, which is the only film in the Friday the 13th that does not feature Jason as Jason, instead rather a cosplayer as Jason doing all the kills.
Guys, this is where I think we're going to differ a lot, where I had a feeling my problems with this movie weren't going to be the same as everyone else's. I really liked Corey and the Corey storyline. I agree it doesn't pick up from anything that Kills left off, and we could talk about how I do think this fails as a sequel to that. But that standalone stuff to me was some of the most interesting stuff in the movie. And it's really the fact that the movie kind of abandons that towards the end to go back traditional is where I think it kind of fails and it's a bit of a mishmash. But I thought about Friday the 13th Part 5, and I never really liked that because they play it as just a red herring, and it's almost like it's not a joke, but like it doesn't really play into the movie. As far as you know, it's Jason the whole time, and it's just a reveal at the end. And I'm always kind of curious that these movies always play with an idea between Friday the 13th and Halloween. So many have ended with a character looking at a knife, and you think, oh, maybe in the next one they're gonna kind of be possessed by what's been going on. Maybe not spiritually, but just mentally. And this movie finally explored that, and I did actually like that stuff. But I think ultimately it failed in the third act to really pay off any of the buildup that the movie spent going for it.
I mean, they open the movie by telling you that the events of the night of Halloween Kills ended, Michael disappeared, they burnt down the house, and then you spend half the movie watching Corey, and somehow Laurie-Strode has decided she's going to be a happy-go-lucky hippie at this point, and is writing a book about her experiences and how evil is in man and we can do better. And you've got Kills that ends with her saying, I know how to stop this. So it goes from one extreme to the other. There's nothing to really lead her to this moment of clarity. And she doesn't even feel like the same character at that point till you get to the end of the movie. It's like the end of the movie is attached to 2018 Halloween and Halloween Kills, but the rest of the movie isn't. Corey, I get what they were trying to do with Corey, but it was slow. It didn't develop. You have the scene in the sewer where Michael Myers grabs him by the throat. You get some sort of flashes and he lets him go. And it's like, what the hell is that all about? And it just, I don't know. It was so disconnected, disjointed, and it was so nonsensical, even for a horror movie. It was like this, somebody didn't know what they were doing here.
So I want to go on record and saying that I don't necessarily hate the Corey stuff. I think the Rohan-Campbell, who plays the character, does a tremendous job in this. I think he's one of the standout performances without a doubt in this movie.
Not to interrupt, but can I just say his face looks like Michael Myers' mask? Like, I think they did a perfect job casting. When he just is blank, he almost looks like Michael Myers' mask. I thought that was great. But continue.
And I can see that, but like I feel like my biggest issue with this whole thing is that we, for this being a finale to a trilogy, because like we had said, like when you look at 2018, when you look at Kills, that's all one cohesive long story. It's taking place over one night. Say what you will about Kills and kind of how it kind of like goes all over the place. It gave you a title. It delivered on that promise. It's camp. It is what it is. This one promised and was marketed as an ending to this saga. Like the fact that they're even using the term saga in their marketing for this film is what just makes me as a consumer feel like I've consumed false advertising. But flipping that around, looking at the film for what it actually is, it just seems very strange to me that all the characters we spent time with and got emotionally invested with in Kills are sidelined for a brand new character. I feel like that's probably my biggest gripe with this, is that I think it's interesting concepts. I liked like the moodiness of it. It felt very bizarre for a finale to a trilogy.
Yeah, I kind of see what you're saying, but what characters, out of curiosity, would you wanted to explore? Because Kills ends with, I'd say, 90% of that cast being murdered, outside of Lindsay, and then the ones we see in this. Like Lindsay's in this, but not really. But outside of her, I feel like we got Allison, we got Laurie. I didn't really know who was left. We got Hawkins.
Honestly, I would have liked to see them kind of explore like Lindsay and kind of their relationship of like how they healed, because not only now have they spent one traumatic night together, but they had a second traumatic night together. And you don't really get to kind of see that, because the story is like, we're going to pick up 4 years later. We're going to do a quick montage of like how the events of Kills has impacted this small town of Haddonfield. And then we're just going to progress forward. And I also would have really liked to kind of see them pursue the Hawkins Laurie love storyline that they kind of hint at a little bit in this movie. Because like Mark said, like, you know, she's kind of like a hippie now, but in contrast, like we've seen her be the sweet babysitter in Halloween. We've seen her be the damaged teenager who finds out she's sisters with a murderer in Halloween 2. We've kind of seen her as the functioning alcoholic in Halloween H2O. We've seen her as a mental patient in Halloween Resurrection. We've kind of seen her as this gun-toting badass in 2018. Even in that arc continues in Kills, but I feel like that was kind of like the last portion of that character, journey that we hadn't seen yet. We hadn't seen her properly heal from this. And so like, I liked the fact that like we're, pursuing her as an author. Well, I love the fact that we're hinting at the fact that like she is coming into her own as a grandmother. She's finally like making up for all the time that she lost because she lived in fear. I liked a lot of the stuff that they did with Laurie in this movie, because I kind of felt like it was the last aspect of that character we hadn't explored yet.
Yeah, and if I could add, just to kind of comment earlier, Mark, when you said she feels like a completely different character, I kind of am going to disagree, because it is 4 years later, and I think it logically follows her and Judy Greer's character storyline, where in the first movie, Judy Greer was a happy-go-lucky kind of believes in the good in people, and Laurie was very much the opposite of that. And then in Kills, we kind of see Judy come over to Laurie's side, and that movie ends with her and a mob going into brute force against Michael Myers, kind of doing what Laurie was trying to do in that first movie, and it ends up getting her killed. And so I kind of saw that in those 4 years, she kind of learned that whole mentality of like, I have to hunt this evil down is ultimately unhealthy. And she kind of learns from her daughter's death and kind of, goes back to the original Laurie that she might have become had she not been attacked in 1978. So I kind of disagree, where I think they did actually do a decent job of making me believe that that's where she would end up now 4 years later. Again, yeah, for me, when I kind of in the beginning, when I was alluding to, I think this movie had the opposite problem of Kills. Halloween Kills, as we talked about last year, I think has some of the greatest violence that any Halloween movie has ever shown. Not the best ever, but it's incredible. The kills and how many there are and how creative they are. And then I ultimately didn't like that story. So while I agree this movie did a bad job of completing the story that started, I also don't really care for the story in Kills, and I kind of find the second half of it to be a bit of a tonal mess story-wise. And in this movie, I actually really liked the story, and I was engaged at the setup with Corey. But I don't know if you guys noticed, there was a lot of off-screen kills. With like a couple of exceptions, the violence was much more toned down in this movie, and it just kind of was a letdown after that big buildup of violence in that last movie. So I was like, Kills, I think, is more fun from a slasher gore perspective, but this one, I was way more into this story. So it was more standalone. It was a bad end to a trilogy, And honestly, I think the ending of the movie is pretty bad. But for me, those first two acts I'm pretty into, including that opening scene, which I was thoroughly shocked by. I went from thinking it was a very generic slasher scene to like, I know we're in spoilers, but like I almost don't want to say it. When that end moment happened, me and all the theater erupted at the same time. And I was like, holy crap, that might be the second best opening to a Halloween movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, my theater was completely silent when that body hit the floor. I screamed.
Yeah,
I never ever scream in a horror movie.
and
That caught me off the way off
it
guard.
almost felt like a Scream movie where the opening like was this big like turn. I was like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
But yes,
Yeah.
it was very un-Halloween. I'll give you that. There was
It felt like they were trying to show the paranoia of the city in that scene. How, oh, my son, ever since the events of a couple years ago, he's scared of the dark and this and that. But then he turns out to kind of be a little bastard after the parents leave. I could see that fitting into the story better than the rest of the movie. It also kind of felt like, oh, well, maybe Michael Myers is gone now. They're going to build Corey to be the next Michael Myers. And he just turned out to be a cheap imitation. And I don't know. I went into it. I hadn't watched any previews because I didn't want to be let down by the movie. I didn't want to get too excited about the movie because I knew there was too much writing on it being good or shitty and ruining the whole series. And pretty much everything I have seen since Thursday night is people comparing it to Halloween 5. I've had friends text me that are just like, how did this even get past production as a viable movie? So I wasn't a fan. I don't see somebody 40 years spent preparing and being paranoid and basically a hermit suddenly becoming mom of the year over 4 years, which is why I didn't really, that wasn't really believable. And the was it Lindsay, the granddaughter? She's just
Allison.
Allison. Okay. I'm bad with names. Allison.
It's all right. I take notes.
She just kind of seemed like a regular early 20 something. She didn't seem like she'd really been through anything dramatic. And Corey was the only one that seemed like he had been through a traumatic incident from actually killing a kid and then gets bullied into becoming the next fake Michael Myers.
All right, Mark, let me unpack so much of what you just said. There's a couple of different points I want to come back onto. So I'm I got them like cherry picked up here, and I'm just gonna slowly pop them as the podcast goes on. But the first one I want to talk about is Haddonfield, because I feel like for the first one of the things that like as I was rewatching was you get that sense in Carpenter's original movie how much of a small town this feels. And I feel like as the sequels kind of progressed on, we got away from that small town feeling to where it feels bigger in scope because, blockbusters sell tickets. But whereas what Gordon Green has done with his team has brought that feeling of the small town back to where it's like everyone knows everyone. And I feel like for the first time in a Halloween movie, we kind of get to see how the events of Michael Myers have like actually had an impact on the town of Haddonfield. And for the first time, Haddonfield feels like a viable character in the story, not just necessarily the setting.
I don't know. I guess I'm the bad guy in this podcast today. I just other than a few creative kills in the movie and the like 10 minutes Michael Myers was actually in it, it had no feeling of a Halloween to me.
First off, it was 11 minutes that Michael Myers was in this.
Oh,
but like even like looking, it is a lot of minutes, like even like stepping back from like the storyline, like I think like that I liked how this story told like this like mental health collective of how the events of kills had an impact, to where like they have this this montage and it's like every death that happens is Michael's fault. And I love the fact that you're kind of getting to explore this, where it's like Laurie's like seeing this like this crime scene, and like knowing that it's not Michael. And you also have Will Patton's character like looking at like two dead bodies in a truck, and talks about how like Michael Myers doesn't use guns and it's not his MO. And I loved the fact that you're kind of getting to, even with like the Jeremy being afraid of the dark because of the Halloween, and then kind of like how the events of the opening prologue to this movie with Corey and Jeremy, and like how all of that affected the town, and kind of like how they operate, and like almost kind of like collectively ostracize this one single I'm sorry, I guess vilify is like the better word to use. This one singular person, I think was just kind of fascinating about how, from like a mental health perspective, how Hadfield processes the deaths of Michael, and now have been kind of like reverted into like this like collective Laurie approach, where there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of paranoia, and everyone is kind of like hesitantly trusting everyone.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, I thought two of the most powerful scenes were Laurie outside of the supermarket when she's smiling after talking to Hawkins, and for like 1 second she's like normal again, and then she's immediately confronted by one of his victims from the last movie. And then the same with Corey when he sees the kid's mom in the bar after he's dancing and having fun for the first time in 4 years as well. And it wasn't, I don't think the dialogue was incredibly well written. Like I don't think these scenes really like blew my socks off, but they introduced kind of some cool themes I liked. And like, so when I thought the story was better, the whole paranoia of the town I thought was built better in this one. I thought Kills really suffered by having it be the same night as that first movie, because that first movie really plays up the fact that most people don't remember Michael Myers, and it's really Laurie's trauma and not the town's trauma. And then all of a sudden overnight it flips where a mob of 50 people could like murder a man in a hospital, basically, So I thought it escalated too quickly. So this time gap actually helped me to believe that it took time for this evil to kind of seep into this town. And if I could, one reason I didn't want to read people online, because one comparison that I thought of this entire movie that I don't know if you've read anyone saying it, is this movie felt so much like It, more so than it felt like Halloween. Haddonfield had a very Derry vibe where like it really causes a lot of violence in town. And then also Corey getting thrown over a bridge and then dragged into a sewer pipe. It was the opening of it too. It was so much like, I just felt like, I'm like, did they just watch that movie when they were writing this? Because it felt way more in line with Stephen King, like kind of that, and like the bullies. It all felt very, very It to me. I don't know. Have you seen anyone say that?
No, but I felt that way like with that sewer sequence in particular. And like not to, we've already plugged your show, but I want to plug it again. Andy and I did a last year leading up to Halloween Kills, we did a massive 2-part episode where we just dove into all the films up to Kills.
At that point, all 11 movies, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I professed in that, and I've professed it on my social media. I love it. Halloween 2 from Rob Zombie is my favorite film in the franchise, and also it's one of my favorite films, if not my favorite film of all time. And that particular sequence with her walking out of the supermarket after seeing Hawkins and kind of being confronted by his victims, I felt like that was like, it almost kind of felt like the press conference scene from Halloween 2, where like here you have like a whole bunch of like lawyers or journalists that are like looking for someone to blame. And so like I feel like I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people in real life where like something kind of goes wrong and they find out that, oh, hey, this dude's a Christian, so like you look for someone to blame, so you go to blame God. And I think in this setting, you for so long, because of how closely tied Laurie Strode and Michael Myers have been, I feel like those sequences of trauma between Corey and the mom in the bar, or Laurie in the supermarket, I feel like those scenes hit harder because it's kind of almost like it feels very grounded to where like if you're angry, you need a source to cast that anger out onto, and that's kind of what I feel like they did really well in those sequences.
Yeah, I mean, in one scene, somebody even makes the comment that Laurie bullied Michael until he finally snapped, referring to the original events that happened when he was a kid, I think is what they were referring to, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. And that's also, not to cut you off, that's also a great callback to Halloween 2018, where Allison and her 2 friends are walking on the sidelines, and the stoner kid asks, hey, wasn't it like her brother or something? And she says like, no, that's just a story somebody made up. And so like to kind of like see an extension of that in that sequence that you're talking about specifically was a really nice callback to say that like Haddonfield's also been kind of telling their own tall tales about the boogeyman as well.
I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I said, I was not a fan in any way, and I didn't try to go in with any expectations. I had seen last few years, because production had gotten kind of pushed back due to COVID and quarantines and stuff. I had seen some articles coming out that they had done multiple test screenings and were reshooting shots and changing parts of the story, which didn't give me much hope.
I felt that, yeah. Like I just, like you said earlier, there's so many ties from the end of Kills that just don't get followed up on, that it's like it doesn't really. To me, it felt like a rewrite. Like it wasn't the original script they were going to go with.
Yeah, and that's part of what made it feel almost incoherent to me. Is it was kind of like, I know a lot of people loved the Batman this summer, but this summer felt like they had 3 or 4 an idea, but couldn't figure out how to flesh them out. So they just stuck them together into one long movie. And that's what this felt like. You've got a movie dealing with Corey, dealing with being basically bullied by the city after he accidentally kills a kid, and possibly becoming the new Michael Myers. You've got Laurie and her granddaughter, who are suddenly chummy like nothing ever happened, and the city's bullying everybody.
To be fair, they were fairly close within the events of the first 2 films, so it's not like their like closeness in here was something that was like a light switch. And I was listening to John Berthol's podcast, The Real Ones, this past week, and he said a line that said pain is like an adhesive. Like it bonds people together. And I feel like that's kind of what we see with their relationship, and like why she's so extra protective of Corey as the film progresses is because you have the traumatic events of kills and nearly, not only nearly losing Laurie, but also losing the Judy Greer character. Like there's a lot of pain and trauma that they've gone through. So like that has bonded them stronger together.
Well, what I was getting to, the end felt like its own different, like it was originally part of the series, because you have Laurie pretty much almost immediately making that switch. And then there were a couple little small scenes where she her face changed and everything from being the happy-go-lucky grandma. And it almost felt like the point of the movie was missed, but that this whole thing was her planting a setup to get to Michael Myers. That this was her end game. This was her plan. Come out in the open so Michael can get me.
Possibly. I kind of want to talk about the ending in general. And actually, really, and like, my biggest gripe with this kind of this trilogy in general was kills pretty much made it 100% undeniable that this is like a supernatural Michael Myers. Like the amount of damage he takes and gets back up. We clearly learn, Laurie says at the end of that movie, we can't kill him with brute force, but now we know something special, which again never really gets followed up on. So then in this movie, it triples down on it, where we actually see Michael heal him, like, which has never really been something. Is that like, it was only told visually, but that's what we were seeing, right? Like he had injuries, and then he would kill someone, and each stab gave him more strength.
Well, he kind of hobbled out in the sewers and then killed that first guy, and he straightened out.
Yeah. And but also later, and then also him and Corey have a supernatural connection. This isn't just a mental thing. That's made very clear, right? Because Corey has the cut on his hand, and later when Michael's killing someone, he rips off the bandage and his cut's healed. So, like, is that like, are we on the same page with that? Because I know it was all visual.
Well, then they showed a scene. If you paid real close attention, Michael turns and you see his hand, and he's got a cut in the same spot down the middle of his hand.
Yeah.
And then suddenly Michael's almost acting like a puppet for Corey.
But so I don't see how that lines up with this ending. So we learned in the last movie, you can't kill him with brute force. You can stab him, shoot him, cut him as much as you want. He won't die. And then he kind of has this connection with Corey through this movie. So in my eyes, from a storytelling perspective, I thought the third act was going to boil down to Laurie trying to save Corey's like soul, basically, and turn him, like, Corey was going to be caught in the middle with either going full Michael or seeing the light and going to Laurie. And instead of a fight to see who can kill each other, it was more a fight for this guy's soul. I know that's not very visually interesting, but I thought that's where the story was leading. But then they just kill Corey very quickly, and they just let all this like so much of that buildup that I love led to nothing. And then they basically kill Michael with brute force. Like, I know it's a little more calm and calculated, but they basically cut and stab and mash him until he dies. But I don't understand how the whole last movie was built on. That's not how you kill him. We know another way. And that's what I meant why I think the ending of this movie is really poor. As much as the good stuff I'm saying about it, I think it fell apart in that ending. But I'm curious your guys' opinions.
Yeah, so let me just start off by saying that they missed a massive opportunity here to explain the way that he takes brute force in the previous two, and kind of gets back up and keeps going. Like, that's never explained. Like, we're led to believe that this is a supernatural thing because, well, quite literally, no one could take, bullets and bats and chains and get back up,
especially at, what was he, in his 60s, early 70s at that point?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So like nobody can like
and living in the sewer, realistically. I mean, come on. I know he eats rats and dogs, but like still, come on. You got to be supernatural to live in a pipe for 4 years.
So nobody could do that. And they missed an opportunity to canonize Halloween 3. And I know that like people are going to have people still have a lot of issues with it being a Halloween movie, and it is what it is. Like, if you know the history behind that movie, what Carpenter and team were trying to do. I think it's one of the strongest in the franchise, but you still could have like said, oh yeah, like the mask that he used is a silver shamrock prototype. And like Stonehenge is how he gets like the ability to like get back up. Because if you notice, like he becomes weaker when he doesn't have the mask on. Like there's like no control. Like it explains how the mask has like a connection to him throughout the other two movies and even here. But like I feel like they missed a huge opportunity by not bringing that in. And David Gordon Green even has gone on like an interview and talking about like the blue font and how we open this movie up is a nod to Season of the Witch. Like it just seems like a big opportunity, big missed opportunity on this part to canonize one of the most underappreciated voices in the Halloween canon and tie it to Michael Myers after 40 years, which this year is the 40th anniversary of Halloween 3.
Well, Halloween 3 has actually, over the last couple of years, seemed to be finally getting the acknowledgement it deserved. People are finally starting to talk about that it was a good Halloween movie. It just suffered from not being a Halloween movie. And they did make some nods to it in this series, like with the three little kids in Kills. They were all wearing the outfits and masks and makeup of the masks you see in Halloween 3. But yeah, it's almost like the mask was his identity. That's who he was, and he was nothing without the mask. So it was more so, it always came across more so as almost a mental attachment to it. Like people do with their careers. My identity is the job I do. My identity is Michael Myers in this mask. This is who I am. So that's more of how I saw it than anything else.
Yeah. I love Halloween 3. You know this, Josh. We talked about it. And I want to go on record saying I would prefer if we didn't have the supernatural element really in this series as much as it is. I prefer more when it's psychological and more a mental thing. I think we could have easily told this story without the rejuvenation thing. I think Corey could have just looked into Michael's eyes and been like mentally possessed and not spiritually or whatever we saw. But I agree with you. If you are going to go that route, which they did, they should have just went for it and had whatever his name is. What was his name? The Silver Shamrock, the old man in the movie, the villain?
Dang, it's like a Cochran or something like that.
Yeah. Like if Cochran walked out in the third act, I honestly at this point would have been like, let's go for it. Like Michael's already fully supernatural, but I do want to go on record saying I would still prefer it to be. I think this series is very good at looking at the psychological trauma of things, and I like that groundedness. The second we go invincibility, I lose a little interest personally.
Well, I mean, he's always been a character that's almost like a juggernaut.
Yeah,
and just destroys everything anyone in his path. And they took that away in this one. It wasn't even the same Michael Myers. It wasn't even the same.
But how do you guys feel about the ending of the last movie talking about brute force can't kill him, but then they literally just stab him to death? Like I felt like it was a very uncreative way to resolve what was set up.
Felt like bullshit.
So like, I want to agree. Yeah, I would agree with what Mark said. Like it feels like to pull from like another recent trilogy. When you look at the Star Wars sequel series, it feels tonally uneven because you have a book ended by J.J. Abrams, and then you have kind of Rian Johnson's take on the character, which is a lot more comedic. It's a lot more like character exploring things. It's a lot more character driven, I guess is the better word, but it feels tonally off with the rest of the story that Abrams was trying to tell. And I feel like that's kind of what they did with this one, was where like you have that really grounded approach in 2018 because it felt almost like a modern day take on Carpenter and Deborah Hill's version of that character. And that's why I think I love it. Like Andy, you professed your love for it already, and I think it's one of the strongest in the franchise. And then you have Kills, which feels like a throwback to like 80s slashers. It feels almost comparable to Halloween 2, where like Halloween 2 kind of has a lot more of that campiness. It has a lot more of that. It's a lot more brutal than the first one was. And then you get to this, and it feels like Halloween 3. It feels tonally different than the first film, and I feel like by having that really long monologue at the end of Kills where it's her and Hawkins, and she's like, you can't kill him with brute force, there's something evil. She's kind of taking on that Dr. Loomis archetype. I really admired that. And then I feel like you said, like they just kill him with brute force. And I felt like it was nice closure for the Laurie Strode character and the rest of the town of Haddonfield, but it felt incredibly rushed, anticlimactic, and like just like a big middle finger to the two kills, which in my opinion is like one of the it's an excellent standalone film. I think it's just a fun, goofy time, but it just kind of felt like they were just like, yeah, we don't care.
Well, I had heard a couple different storylines that they were supposedly working with for the third one. Like one of them was Laurie becoming Michael Myers.
Give it to me.
Essentially snapping from dealing with Michael Myers and just taking on the role at that point.
I stand corrected. That is the only Laurie that we have not seen explored on the big screen. Yeah. It's explored in the comics and it's teased at the end of Halloween 2. And had they done Halloween 3 3D, we would have gotten that.
Well, that was one of the stories they had discussed. One of the storylines is having Laurie take over and becoming essentially Michael Myers at that point. I had heard where Allison may have tried to become the next big killer, kind of like they did with the girl that was psychically linked in, what was that, 5?
Yeah.
Something like that. I had heard a couple different stories. I could have possibly been okay with the Laurie Strode finally just kind of like snapping and had enough, because I have that feeling in traffic every day. So it's
all right. So before we pop this Halloween 5 bubble up here, I want to get your guys' opinions, because to me, I don't feel like Jamie Lee Curtis taking up the mantle of Michael Myers and the Shape, I don't feel like that's a fitting end to like her character, and I feel like that idea is kind of passed for her, whereas I feel like it still could have worked for Scout Taylor Compton's version of the character, but I'm not necessarily it feels tonally out of line with where we've seen her character.
Well, I could see it happening from the aspect of she's built for 40 years and been obsessed for 40 years and then doesn't get that closure and has lost her daughter, her son-in-law and family and friends and everybody. And Michael gets away after almost killing her. I could see something like that, just finally just snapping and losing it and losing herself into what she had become, into what she had been hunting.
I could possibly see that if they did that in the past, but at the point we're at now, I firmly believe this is the last time we'll see Jamie Lee Curtis play Laurie Strode. I do think there'll be more Halloweens. I don't think this is the end of the series, but I think this is the end of this creative team. And she's at an age where I just don't see the creative benefactor of coming back again. She did it when it was 20 years old. She did it when it was 40. So at this point, knowing that this is 99% chance the last time we'll see her, I don't really think for the fans, it would be a fitting end to watch her all of a sudden be evil this last time. Had they done it 20 years ago, maybe when we still knew there was some future left in the series, but to me, it would kind of be like Nev Campbell being the killer in the last Scream. It would kind of be like a fuck you to everyone who loves Sydney. Like, I love Laurie Strode. I don't believe that character would end up killing people. I could see her being mentally distraught for her entire life, but yeah, it would just be hard. If this was the last time we saw her and she was just like killing her granddaughter, it would be hard as a fan, personally.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and boop. Let me just pop that Halloween 5 bubble. And you talked about like the psychic link. So initially, little history lesson. Initially, with the success of Halloween 4, they toyed with the idea of Halloween 5 kind of being basically like Jamie taking up the mantle of.
That's all I ever wanted.
That's all I ever wanted. Yeah, of it, and like the book taking shape, which Andy and I talked about last year a lot with his podcast. It's a book that I still recommend if you're a Halloween fan. But like in Taking Shape 2, they talked about like the success of it, and like some of the financing for the film actually came from like theaters saying, hey, we'll help finance your film, but the catch is that you can't make Jamie the killer. So that's the reason why we got the psychic connection we got. That's the reason why it feels really lackluster, is kind of like a large portion of like the finances came from that agreement. And that's the reason why we ended up with it the way we did. To me, like this film with like kind of psychically linking, because that's what we're gonna call it right now. We're just gonna like psychically linking Corey and Michael together. I felt like it was a fascinating concept, and it kind of like explores this like, what if Jamie like actually explored? But like to me, it's a lot less compelling because Jamie's is like actual like bloodline, whereas Corey is just some random kid that was made up for this movie.
I could see that too, but I also kind of think this whole series has really been trying to steer away from bloodlines from the very beginning. So I can see it a little more, where it's like the idea is Haddonfield is cursed with this evilness. So I could buy it there, but yeah, I do think ultimately it does fail. As much as I liked it, that third act, and Corey essentially kills himself for like to set up Laurie, but it doesn't pay off. It doesn't really mean anything. I really thought it was going to be, the battle was going to be something about trying to save Corey, and it was just, he just dies, and it's like for no reason, and then it just becomes a fight, just like the end of 2018, and it wasn't for me, that ending.
I feel like him dying was also the reason that I kind of had such a hatred for this film, because it's like I've just spent the last hour and a half with this character for him to die. Like I've gotten emotionally invested, and then you're just kind of like, psych.
Yeah, like, because she even says one of the last lines is when Roy's writing her book is like, evil doesn't die, it changes shape. So like I thought like him passing it on to Corey was almost like, what if that is how it worked? What if when he was 6 there was another evil that passed on to him, and then so Michael passed it on to him, and that's how his body would eventually die, by giving this evil to a new person. But then the town beats the evil by overcoming it for the first time instead of accepting it. So I just kind of thought that's where the route was going, but they just really nipped the whole thing right in the butt by having him stab himself in the face.
Yeah, that didn't really make much sense either.
Yeah, I didn't
he was turning into a serial killer, and then like, oh, I'm gonna stab myself in the neck.
Something else that was really weird, like I watched Halloween Kills with the commentary on before watching this movie, because I really wanted to get an idea of what they were going with this ending. And one thing that was really confusing to me is, the watchtower in this movie that they talk about climbing and then eventually is on fire. In tons of scenes in Kills, that watchtower is in the background, and on the commentary, David Gordon Green constantly talks about like, oh yeah, we digitally put in that watchtower because it's planting a seed that's going to pay off really big in the next movie, and I knew I was making a trilogy, so I wanted to make sure that watchtower was always present. A, I never noticed it personally until he said it, and then B, when I watched this movie, I was like, that watchtower meant virtually nothing. Like I didn't really understand it. It was burning at the end, but I didn't really get that connection to what was happening in the storyline.
I mean, is it a victim of writers and production thinking they were more clever than they really were?
I think it's that. And I also think it's like these guys famously pitched Halloween to Jason Blum. Like they had a great idea for Halloween 2018 and sold it. It wasn't the studio's idea to make this movie. And they were incredibly passionate about it. And I think it shows in the movie. But I also think it shows they weren't passionate about making a Halloween trilogy. It was a victim of its own success. And then the studio said, now you guys did great, make 2 more. And I just don't think they had an idea. And it's just kind of shows that they, this movie had 4 writers. That's not the norm when you're making a movie. I think they just were bringing in tons of people, taking in tons of ideas. And it's why I think 2018 and Kills and Ends feel very different. I think 2018 is a much just greater movie, better characters, better writing, better kills, just everything, more suspense. This movie likes suspense big time.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like anytime you have more than 2 writers on a project, like I could understand like, oh yeah, like we're developing like a story. So like we sat around in a writer's room and like all of these people like helped like do different like aspects of the story and like different kills. Like I feel like from that perspective, it's okay. But when you have actual like more than 2 writers on a film, it is just kind of spelling doom before the film even kind of gets off the ground.
I mean, it's hard to get 2 or 3 people on the same page of a conversation half the time.
Exactly.
There's 3 of us here right now, and I think Josh is kind of in the middle. I'm on one end, you're on the other.
Yeah,
and
true.
it shows when you get more than like 2 or 3 people writing the movie. It's going to show in that too. You've got all of them with their different ways of thinking that this is how it needs to take place.
Yeah, I felt very similar with the new Candyman. It had so many things I liked, and then so many things that fell flat. And then the movie ended, and I saw 4 to 5 writers written on the screen, and I was like, that makes sense. It's like it was so many people came with a great idea, but because they used all of them, nobody really got a full idea out of it. You know?
Yeah, then the guy you're there to see doesn't actually show up till the very end of the movie.
Yeah.
So,
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Like I guess like this is a horror movie and it's more specifically a slasher film. How did you guys kind of, once the deaths actually like took place on screen, we got to see it, some of the brutality. How did you guys feel about some of the way that the victims were slayed in this movie?
I kind of said earlier, I was pretty disappointed. I think that at least 3 deaths were off camera, including Corey's mom, which I really wanted to see, especially after she kissed him. That was just like, this is so creepy. When she slaps him in the face and then immediately kisses him on the lips. And I was like, oh, this is why this guy's damaged. But yeah, a lot of off-screen kills. And then even like ones that really could have went there, like when he kills the teens with the blowtorch, it was still just kind of framed in a way where we didn't really see it. And I'm not in love with gore, but I just think after kills, they set a precedent and they didn't live up to it.
So one of the things with Corey's mom, the first thing that came to mind was some of the reports that came out about Ed Gein and his mom. His mom was super controlling, put him down, whole 9 yards, just like Corey's mom was doing.
Yeah.
So that was part of why I thought maybe they were setting up for him to become Michael Myers, not just little angsty kid. So yeah, I wasn't a big fan of her character, but I saw that may be what they were trying to do. The kills, some of them are decent. Some of them were kind of lackluster, but they all felt not as well thought out as the previous movies.
Yeah.
They seemed more quick to, okay, we have waited almost the entire movie. Let's get a couple kills on screen real quick so we could say that this was a slasher. It's kind of what it felt like.
I will say though that like once you actually physically get to see them, I enjoyed what we got to see. I think the VJ was the DJ was probably my favorite kill out of any most recent.
My theater was going nuts during that one.
But it wasn't the Michael Myers kill though. That was part of the thing.
It wasn't, and I went back through and like before I did my like spoiler-free review for our YouTube, I had watched the trailer and I was like, all right, like what is technically like, is there like spoilers in this one? And when I talk about like how piss poorly this was marketed, almost all of Corey's kills when he's actually in the Michael Myers getup are in this trailer.
Yeah,
And they're
'cause they
passed off of like you're Michael. And
Mhm.
I hated that. And I really wish too, like Andy, you brought up like the blowtorch scene. I would have loved to see that, like the blowtorch scene, like a POV
with a
shot.
practical effect and everything. Yeah, it would have
Yeah.
been awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like you set that precedent, like you said with kills, and you just, again, to go back to what Mark was saying, it's a big middle finger to the previous getup of what you've done.
Yeah, for
And I
sure.
think Myers only killed like 2 people the entire movie. Or 3. Sorry, 3.
Probably.
And
I guess I don't think I have as much of a problem as not seeing Michael physically do it, like because I was into the story. As kills are kills, like I didn't really need it to be Michael, but
Yeah.
I
yeah,
mean,
just you
with
know,
the exception of Halloween 3, people go to see Halloween to see Michael Myers slaughter people. I mean, that's essentially why you see a Halloween movie. And then you've got a Halloween movie that he's barely in, and somebody else is doing all the killing.
yeah, agreed. I think one of the silliest scenes for me visually that I think they should have chose to not film was when Corey takes Michael's mask from him and they wrestle like 2 little brothers. I I rewatched it on Peacock just to make sure. I thought it was as silly as I was, and I was just like, I don't know what they were thinking. I don't really think this movie. I don't mind Michael not being that much in it, but like that scene specifically, I was like, that's really taking a lot of the lore and scariness away from Michael. Like watching him wrestle with this little teen, with this like 22-year-old.
And like also like Mike, like talking about like Michael before kind of like, you know, coming back up after that little skirmish is like he's like really weak and frail throughout the entirety, like the first 2 acts of this movie.
Yeah.
And that to me, like, again, to like we keep going back to like how they just kind of seem to like abandon kills. Like they acknowledge kills, but they don't like necessarily have the stakes of kills. And
Yeah, because if killing and stabbing heals him, then he did plenty of killing and stabbing at the end of kills.
Yeah.
So he should be full strength. If it's a video game and we're going by those rules, his health bar should be right at the top.
well,
Yeah,
like
he
even when we
should have
meet
been
him in
supercharged, superpowered at that point.
yeah, even when we meet him in 2018, like he hasn't killed anyone in over 40 years, but is like still like functional.
Yeah.
He's still like has the capability to just like jump in exactly where he left off,
God.
you know, as a 21-year-old. And then we're led to believe as a 61-year-old that like he still has like all the strength. And I'm like, okay, I can get behind that. But then your last chapter, you just kind of like it completely ignore what you set up as like universe rules. Like that just doesn't, like storytelling wise, doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and it goes back to what I said, that the movie didn't fit the storyline at all. No. Nothing about the movie felt like it fit what happened in 18 and kills.
I could see this being I feel like this becomes like a better sequel / like finale to like Laurie's H2O storyline than it does like the 2018 storyline, because like the 2018 or H2O like had a little bit of that camp in it, and I feel like this one has like balances that camp, and like you don't necessarily need to see like Michael to like, you know, kind of like know that he's out there. Like I'm okay with that, but like I don't know. I felt like this film had like several nods to Halloween 5, because if you know, like at the end of Halloween 4, Michael gets shot and killed,
Blown
and
up,
like
yeah.
he's blown up, like he goes downstream, and then like a shaman or someone like comes and like takes care of him essentially, and like for an entire
I think you
year.
went too much taking shape. The shaman was the original script. It was just an old weird hermit.
Oh,
they changed it. Yeah,
okay.
it was supposed to be a magic man, but they changed it because they didn't want to go that route.
You're right. But like, yeah, like I feel like, you know, that's kind of the route that they took with him in this one, and like it feels campy in that way, and I feel like it doesn't feel satisfactory for this timeline, but I could see it working in something like H2O resurrection type situation.
Yeah. I want to talk about what I also think is a huge missed opportunity is I thought with the 4-year time jump, it was a perfect opportunity to bring back Julian from the first movie. And I know he has one little scene, the little boy who gets babysat in the first movie. I thought he was the best side character in that entire movie. And I get why he wasn't in Kills because they made it 3-4 years later and it was the same night and that kid grew up. So now I was like, we're going to have him back. He's going to be great. And we just get to see him in that one little scene at the end when he's marching with everyone, all the townsfolk towards when they're killing Michael. And I would have loved a little more Julian. Personally.
Oh, I'm right there with you. I think Julian's a great character. And anytime I go back to rewatch 2018, I always love his his banter and his dialogue with his babysitter, and like even like seeing Michael, he's like, oh hell no, and then just like runs off. Like he's probably one of the best parts in that movie. And like even when he makes a cameo in Kills, like his dialogue is like still very funny.
Yeah.
Even though he's kind of talking about something traumatic, like it's just kind of like the way that like he carries himself, and I really, really admired that. And yeah, I would have liked to kind of see a little bit more of kind of like them exploring like, again, like I know that like Haddonfield kind of feels like a town as a character in this movie, but you only see 2 of his victims from this timeline, and that kind of to me felt like a real like missed opportunity. Like even Kyle Richards, who plays Lindsay Wallace in this movie, and Will Patton as well, like as Hawkins, like they feel like side characters.
Yeah, Lindsay especially. I think they really squandered that. Hawkins, I felt like he had a little heart to it. I did enjoy him and Laurie's scenes together, but yeah, Lindsay. I mean, they have like game night, and that's it. I forgot. It took me a second to even recognize her. I was like, oh yeah, Lindsay. I forgot. I don't know why they kept her alive as opposed to killing the rest of the legacy cast from the last movie.
Yeah, she's a lot more like made up for this time around. Like because like when you look at her like in Kills, like she's like kind of like makeup wise, she's very toned down. Then you look at her in this movie, and she's kind of like very like glamorous and like always like dolled up, and she's kind of the bartender now. I don't know if that necessarily like comes with the territory of being a bartender. Like, the more makeup you wear, the more tips you get. I'm not a bartender, nor am I a female. I
don't want to be cynical, but I know she's on a reality TV show, and I could imagine she just didn't have a lot of time off and probably came straight from set and filmed her scene.
I don't
want to be cynical, but I work in the business. I know how things work. They work around schedules, and I could very much imagine that. Because she was very much a lot more committed to the last movie in terms of his time schedule. And this, it seemed more like a cameo.
Yeah, that's fair.
I was kind of curious. So like everyone that I know that knows I'm a Halloween fan that doesn't really watch these movies, they all keep asking me the same question. They're like, so they're really not going to make any more after this? And I kind of feel like they were kind of in a Friday the 13th part 4, the final chapter situation, where like we all can agree this isn't the last Halloween movie we're going to see in our lifetimes. Just even if we want to be cynical about it from a studio standpoint, they're not going to throw this character out. But I think it's very much the last time this creative team will make Michael Myers and the storyline and all that. So do you guys have any like wants or don't wants for whatever comes next? It might be 10 years from now. It was 9 years between Zombie and this, so we might not see it for a decade. But
it's like every 10 or so years they decide to put out a couple new Halloweens.
Yeah.
So
but ever since Donald Pleasant's passing, it's very much been reliant on either Laurie Strode or like Rob Zombie, where it was a very specific director giving their take.
Yeah, you are essentially gonna have to like reboot it from scratch if you want to bring it back.
I have a prediction.
And that's never happened.
I have a prediction. I'm not necessarily saying this is what I want, but I think based on how well received that 1978 scene in Kills was with that Loomis cameo, I think we're going to go back to the Loomis well, and we're going to be seeing some now that they've seen that fans can accept a different Loomis that's not necessarily Donald Pleasance. I think we're going to see some retellings, maybe akin to a Bates Motel, where it's kind of like a remake, but they're telling the story differently because obviously, to have a little more like a younger Loomis or some Loomis years. I think that's where they're going to go next.
Or one of the other things they could do is Zombie did apparently have a script or story together for Halloween 3. But he was kind of forced to change the story to where Michael Myers gets like wood chippered.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see them doing something with that, maybe pull it from that.
I don't know, like, so as someone that passionately loves Halloween 2, I would love them to, and one of my, probably literally one of the only podcasts I still pay attention to faithfully is the Talk Scary to Me, which is the Scout Taylor Compton and Daniel Harris, who have played Annie and Laurie in the Rob Zombie timeline, then also Jamie Lloyd in the 4 and 5. I honestly would love them to kind of bring back and kind of conclude her story a little bit better. I think that like that to me is a little bit more interesting than just saying we're going to reboot the character, because let me just say that like I think in the last almost 15 years now, the Halloween 1 and 2 from Rob Zombie have gotten, yes, they're still going to have their haters, but they've gotten a lot more fans, and it's kind of served as a cult status. I would love to see them bring that back. I would love to perhaps, like, if we're gonna reboot and you're gonna kind of go real bold with it, I think you could reboot this and kind of flesh out the Curse of Thor. That's it, right? Thorn.
I think there's an N at the end.
Yeah.
The Curse of Thorn. I feel like that could be like an interesting storyline, rather than just like walking territory we've already walked.
I mean, excuse me. I'd almost like to see him go, you know what? We fucked up. Let's make another third movie for this trilogy. Sorry about that. Our bad. I'd like to see something.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, I don't think it's going to happen either.
So that's essentially what the Halloween movies have been the whole time, is them going, our bad. Let's fix it with this.
Yeah.
And then that storyline ultimately doesn't have a great payout. Our bad. We're going to do another set of Halloween movies to take place off the end of this one. So we're going to give you a new storyline.
Yeah.
And I could see them doing that simply for that reason. Halloween is a choose your own adventure. If you don't watch one storyline, you watch a different set of movies.
Or you make a sequel to Season of the Witch.
I can see that.
I would go with that. Yeah, in terms of continuing these old storylines, I would love it as a fan, obviously, because I'm just a freak and I want to see every aspect of this, every storyline explored every way. But I think that would be kind of hard for a studio thinking, because there are plenty of people who don't follow these movies and don't really know the storylines that well. So I'm trying to think of them trying to market something of being like, the new Halloween is the sequel to the sequel of the remake that came out in 2007. Like people have a hard time grasping what's continuing what. So I just think it would be not impossible, but I just think it would be pretty hard for them to grasp, like a common man who's only really knows Michael Myers because pop culture. It would be hard. And kind of same thing with continuing Thor. And if they're like, remember part 6? Well, we're going to do part 6, part 2. And it's just like, it's hard. It would be very hard to explain to people what's going on.
But outside of them admitting they screwed up and doing a real sequel to Kills, I actually wouldn't really want them to do anything else with Halloween. Just leave the series alone at this point. It's Hollywood.
I think
Hollywood's not going to do that.
Oh no, that's what I mean. Like no matter what, it's coming back. So
I also too, like, one of the things that like we've I think I've talked to you about this, Andy, but like right now, so like right now I would like to maybe you don't need to have anything like super big and kind of like out there, like where we're gonna reboot and we're gonna do like a trilogy, like you could just do like a one-off. I think it would be cool to, maybe we bring back, kind of set in like set in the original continuity of 78, but like make it, explore something where it's like, okay, hey, like we're gonna have like a Blumhouse showdown where like Blumhouse has now acquired the rights to Freddy and Jason, and the three of these characters are gonna duke it out to kind of see like who is the best of the best. Like that's still like my inner like horror fandom. I would love to see that. I don't know necessarily if it'll happen.
I'd be there. I don't even know if it would necessarily be good, but I would be there.
No,
like I would
but like,
be there.
Yeah, like I would prefer to like see something like that as kind of like a one-off story rather than be like, you know what, we're gonna make you invest in and care about these characters again, and it'll be the on par with the messiness of the original timeline.
I mean, if you're going to go that route, you might as well just throw Ash in there.
Yeah.
Rights, though. Rights. If Blumhouse got the rights, because all right, so like that's the reason I brought up Freddy and Jason is because Jason right now, obviously, famously has been in and out of courts for the last 10 years. It feels like
it's a nightmare.
Yeah, and then the rights reverted back to the estate of Wes Craven, so like they're up for grabs right now.
Oh, nice.
Well, I think I heard talks that their Blumhouse is trying to do something with Nightmare on Elm Street.
He is.
And they are throwing huge amounts of money trying to get Robert Englund to come back.
Yes. Recently at ironically enough, I think it was at the premiere for Halloween Ends, Heather Langenkamp came and someone asked her, like, now that like we have this like legacy idea, would you ever come back and do a Freddy Krueger movie? And she said that she would absolutely love to do it. And I think personally it would be awesome to have a direct sequel to let's say Night Dream Warriors, and have her trilogy be 1984's Nightmare Dream Warriors Legacy.
I'd be pretty into that also. Although I will say I consider Nightmare Dream Warrior New Nightmare to be a fantastic trilogy, but I get that New Nightmare is very meta and breaks the fourth wall. But I think those, I always tell people, if you're only going to watch those three and you get a pretty great story from beginning to end.
Yeah, I love New Nightmare. Like don't get me wrong, but it's in its own continuity. Yeah.
But all right, I just want to be on record saying, because if this comes true, I want to come back and play this recording. But now that I'm saying I want this, but I think the future of Halloween is going to be a TV series about Loomis, and it's either going to be called Loomis or it's going to be called Smith's Grove. I'm not saying that's what I want, but I'm saying that's what I think. That's how the studios think, and I see it coming. And I'm just calling it now because I want some credit if it happens.
I was actually sitting here thinking that exact same thing that they're going to end up doing.
They did it with Nurse Ratched from Cuckoo's Nest. They did it with Bates Motel. We did it with Hannibal. I see it. I see it happening. But you can't do Michael Myers, the TV show, so it's going to be about Loomis.
Why not?
Yeah,
they did it with Norman Bates.
Yeah, but he talks and has a personality. Michael, you can't do it every week.
You could
Michael
do
just
that.
Walking around.
You could do his childhood growing up and what happened that he finally snapped.
That's why I think
a couple seasons.
That's true. And I think the Smith's Grove angle too, you can have Michael be a kid, but they'll have to do what Bates Motel did and add a bunch of other killers, because obviously nobody died. Like when Bates Motel, like I love that show, but when you finish it, it's so far removed from the story of the original Psycho. It's its own thing.
Yeah, I definitely would like to see them. I think that's kind of like what they would do next, because like you look at like things like Gotham and Pennyworth, which in Bates Motel, like which have proven to say like, hey, we're gonna remove the iconic characters and kind of tell their backstories. Like Gotham, I feel like is a great example to where it's like this is the origin story of Gotham City and James Gordon, but without Batman.
Yeah,
and I feel like if you're going to do like a Smith's Grove thing, I feel like it takes the most logical sense to say, we're going to do a Michael Myers storyline without Michael Myers, but it's going to have Dr. Loomis. And I feel like it could work. I don't necessarily want that. But if they did it,
I'm just predicting it. It's not my hopes and dreams. It's just what I think is coming next.
Yeah, if they did it too, I would really, really not want them to do I would really not want them to de-age or like deep fake the actor. Like just cast another person as Loomis.
Yeah, I think what they did in Kills, that was prosthetics. Like that wasn't CGI.
Oh,
Yeah. I
yeah,
looked into it.
fair enough.
They showed it. It was all they got a guy who looked a lot like him, and then they just used prosthetics to fill in the gaps.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I stick with my original. I don't really want them to do anything else with it outside of fixing this.
That's fair too. I
Halloween
mean,
ends.
this was Halloween 13. Like, if you're really counting, it's a lot of movies.
Yeah, and I don't know. Like I'm kind of with Mark on this one. Unless you have like a good idea, don't just make a movie for a movie's sake.
Yeah, that's why 2018 was so good. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't the studio saying figure out how to make Michael Myers work. Someone said, I know how to make Michael Myers work. Can we make this?
Well, I think like covering Hellraiser a couple weeks ago. One of the reasons that I feel like I loved that movie so much was because I know the history behind it. I know how long they have been trying to get that film off the ground, but also on the same side, I also know that like there's a lot of like terrible films that have come in the wake to say we're going to make a Pinhead movie just for the sake of making a Pinhead movie,
or like for the sake of not losing the rights or something.
Yeah,
and
that's what Fox did with X-Men. Why you got so many shitty X-Men
Mhm.
movies was because they didn't want the rights to go back to Marvel. So
Mhm.
they just kept throwing out sequel after sequel after sequel and didn't really care.
Yep.
I really hope that with something as iconic as Halloween and Michael Myers, we don't get that. Regardless about how I feel about how Ends treats its characters and some of the character choices it makes, I don't want a Halloween movie just for the sake of a Halloween movie. Like
Agreed.
I agree fully with what Mark said. Like just leave it alone, let it rest until someone comes along and they're like, I have an idea for this. And I would love to kind of see them do like a A24 something, like I don't know, like really grounded take on this character that feels like, I don't want to say elevated horror, but like something that kind of like takes the ideas that Rob Zombie had for the first half of 2007 and like fleshes them out to where it doesn't feel like two cohesive visions trying to occupy screen time.
Yeah, agreed. I don't want Halloween to go away forever because I'm just a fanboy, and like if you tell me I could never sit in a theater and see a new one again for my life, I'll be sad. But I'm down for a break, and when I mean a break, I mean like 9 years. Like I don't really need anything coming up down the pipeline for a long time, unless it's like you said.
I mean, that's kind of the time frame they do.
Yeah,
with these
exactly.
Is somewhere between 7, 8 years. 9 years, they put out a new one, and then they do a couple real quick.
Yep.
And then they take a big break, and then throw out a couple new ones, and then take a big break.
I want it to stay though.
And I think that's part of what's kept Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street so relevant. They did a remake of both. Both did not have very good viewer reviews or ratings or whatever. And they've left them alone since. I know they've discussed doing things with them, but they've just left them alone.
Well, in the defense of Nightmare, I will say that I know it has its haters. I'm one of the defenders. I think that movie has really good ideas. I feel like it just kind of falls a little short in some aspects, but and also like
Jackie Earl Haley did a decent job.
Great job. Yeah.
Playing Freddy, but it was a case of the girl taking on Pinhead and having to take that on after Doug Bradley. And I think that's what kind of bit Jackie Earl Haley in the ass for Nightmare on Elm Street, is he had to follow up Robert Englund.
For me, it was the recreation of the scenes. I would have just liked something more original, but
same.
We're not here to talk about that.
But like with Friday, they did not, for lack of a chance, try. Like they actively developed sequels to 2009 for years before going into court. So it's not like they didn't do it, but like I agree. But like the last bubble over here to get back to kills or ends that I have here is the healing of Laurie Strode. And you talked about like how like Mark, you kind of had like a weird, I don't want to say love-hate relationship, but kind of did feel quite like the character. I disagree. I think that this is a character that is still healing, not only from the traumatic events of 1978 and 2018, but also the death of her daughter and kind of the warpath of Michael Myers. And I feel like, she's been kind of like stigmatized for so long that like her only last option is to kind of tell her story and do it in a really creative manner. And I think that was such a beautiful way to kind of also end her story, was not only getting the closure with the meat grinder in the end, but also at the same time to kind of show that like time can heal all wounds, like if we allow it. And I feel like that's the big preface that you have to have, is that you have to allow time to heal your wounds. How we respond to wounds and trauma is how we respond to it,
And I get that. I understand that. But I don't think it was done well in the movie from a movie aspect, but a mental health aspect, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, mental health wise, like I think that like the more that we're open and honest about the traumas, or the less sunshine moments that we experience in life, the less it has power over us. I think we try and like stigmatize a lot of traumatic things, whether that's war, sexual assault, depression, and Laurie shows an excellent example to where like there are still people that, again, bringing back that supermarket scene, where that like look at her and kind of like you look at her as Michael Myers interchangeably. And this was kind of her chance to kind of like put her story out there and show that there is power in words. Well, I guess that's gonna do it for us on this episode.
Yeah, that was that was deep. I was living in that. That was like I just couldn't calculate a good response, but I agree, and I see where you're coming from, Mark. Like I said up top, where I don't think that this is an incredibly well written movie, but when it comes to slashers, I can kind of lurch more on the points they're bringing up and less on the individual writing of the dialogue. But yeah, from a mental health aspect, I think it really brought up some interesting things.
Yeah, and it's like it also teaches us to learn how to find joy again after trauma, which is something that I feel like doesn't get talked about a whole lot.
Yeah, I think it was just poorly handled in the movie all the way around. And that's why I didn't say anything. It's pretty much because I'm just repeating myself at this point. So I don't think anything was handled well in this movie.
Agree to disagree. So in the section below, you will find our mental health resource library if you or someone you know is struggling and with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression. And we just want to encourage you guys to tell your stories. I feel like that's one of the things that this film does really well, is it encourages us to tell its story. Whether or not how that's handled in the story is regardless. But yeah, so where can people find you online, Andy?
You can find me at LWIL Podcast. That's their social media. And you can find our podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Apple, Spotify, all those great places.
And you can also hear Andy and I, along with his fiance, talking about Bring It On, Cheer or Die, wherever you guys get podcasts from as well.
Yes, you can. This was better than Cheer or Die. I'll give you
that. Mark, where can people find you online?
I've actually got a couple finished pieces. I want to get some good photographs up on my model painting page on Instagram, Titanium Juggernaut Painting. I want to get some good pictures taken for once instead of something sitting on my desk, because they turned out really nice. So
I'm excited to see those. You guys can follow me on my film journey over at Letterboxd. I'm at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can follow me on TikTok at Gent Ghostface, Gent. And you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Patreon. And we're, of course, wherever you guys get your podcast from. And yeah, so until next time, remember that the longer that you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.